Men don't stop loving, they just grow so tired, they forget how to feel. A man doesn't break from the screams. He shatters from the silence that follows. When his voice becomes an echo in an empty room, it begins not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet implosion. A realization that his words, his feelings, his very essence are no longer being received. This is the moment the foundation cracks. He stops fighting for a connection that feels one-sided. He ceases explaining himself to deaf ears. He abandons the hope that anyone will see the storm raging beneath his calm exterior. This is the birth of the great quieter silence that isn't audible, but visceral, growing inside him like ivy on a forgotten wall, thick and suffocating. Can you remember a time when you felt truly heard? For him, that time is a distant memory. There was an era when he cared with every fiber of his being. He composed messages infused with his soul, only to see them vanish into the void. He waited by the phone for a call that never came, each passing minute a tiny erosion of his spirit. He offered love in its purest form, a boundless gift to those who only accepted it in measured, convenient doses. He aspired to be the man who understands, the one who listens, the rock in the swirling river of someone else's chaos. But no one ever asked about the cost of being that rock. No one noticed the weight he carried, the silent sacrifices that bent his spine. They told him to be strong, to suppress the overthinking, to simply move forward. And so he did. Initially, it was a defense mechanism, a shield against the piercing arrows of disappointment. Then it became a habit, a second nature. Eventually, it solidified into his identity. The man who once spoke with passion now speaks in monosyllables. The man who loved with a fiery intensity has now withdrawn into a fortress of his own making. The man who harbored hope has seen it extinguished, like a star collapsing in on itself. The strongest walls are built with the bricks of silence. Now, he wears a mask of calmness, so expertly crafted it could fool anyone. He smiles when his world is crumbling. He laughs when he feels a profound nothingness. He says, "I'm good," because the raw, unvarnished truth is no longer currency in his relationships. But in the deepest chamber of his heart, he knows the real narrative. He didn't stop believing in love. Love, it seemed, stopped believing in him. It stopped rewarding his authenticity. It stopped nurturing his efforts. It stopped being a sanctuary and became a battlefield. And so he retreated into silence. Not out of malice or hatred, but out of a soul-deep exhaustion. How many times can a man reach out into the darkness, grasping for a hand, only to find nothing but cold? Empty space before his heart simply goes dormant. This is the genesis of the emotional void. It's not a fiery rage. It's a cold, vast emptiness. The sound isn't a roar. It's the quiet sigh of a man who once yearned to be loved, finally accepting that he is easier to manage, easier to ignore when he feels absolutely nothing at all. Every man carries the memory of the precise moment he stopped trying. It's rarely a cinematic scene with slammed doors and shouted accusations. It's a slow, subtle collapse. A quiet, devastating epiphany that no matter how much of himself he pours out, it will never be enough to fill the cup of another's expectations. That is the insidious nature of rejection. It doesn't always arrive with a clear no. Often, it seeps in through the cracks of silence. In the way her eyes, which once sparkled like constellations at his arrival, now barely flicker. In the way her voice, which once felt like a warm embrace, now carries a chill that makes him feel like a stranger in his own story. At first, he fights it. He buys flowers, not out of joy, but as a plea. He apologizes for crimes he didn't commit, hoping to restore a peace that has long since fled. He waits, with a patience that borders on self-destruction, for the ghost of what once was to return. But she doesn't, and so he begins to shrink. Each text message left without a reply becomes a heavy stone in his pocket. Each perfunctory kiss becomes a painful reminder of the intimacy that has decayed. And the man who once believed, with every cell in his body, that he could make love work, begins to fade from the picture. Because rejection isn't just about being left. It's about being made invisible while you are still standing right there. It's sharing a life with someone who has emotionally vacated the premises months ago. It's lying in a bed next to a body that no longer turns towards you in the night. A body that feels more like a monument to what was lost than a partner in what is not. Do men have a place to voice this kind of pain? Society tells them no. When they try, they are branded as weak, needy, too emotional. So they learn to swallow it. They pack the pain down, deep inside, and carry it with a stoicism that is mistaken for strength. They make it look easy, but inside, the cracks spread like fissures in dry earth. Until one day he looks into the mirror and the man staring back is a hollowed-out version of himself. He isn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and his is spent. He is just ... empty. That's the part that remains hidden from the world. How rejection doesn't shatter him in one blow, but erodes him, grain by grain, with every dismissive glance. Every time he feels like a burden, every time he realizes his love has become an inconvenience, so he stops trying, he stops reaching out, he stops showing up. Not because he stopped caring, but because caring has become a form of self-inflicted torture that hurts infinitely more than the starkness of being alone. And that is when the void deepens, transforming from a crack into a chasm. When he realizes that love isn't a safe harbor, that emotion isn't valued in him, and that his silence is the only defense the world cannot penetrate. He doesn't hate love. He just stopped believing that it was ever designed for a man like him. There is a particular flavor of heartbreak that doesn't come from a clean break or a final goodbye. It comes from staying, from showing up day after day to a relationship that has become a ghost town, pretending the streets are still bustling when they are deafeningly empty. This is what happens when men give up on love. They don't always physically leave. Often, they stay long after their heart has checked out. They play their part flawlessly. They say the right lines. They perform the expected duties. But something fundamental within them has been extinguished. Love used to be his compass, his purpose, the thing that made the grueling hours bearable and the dark nights softer. Now, it feels like just another item on an endless to-do list, another domain where he is perpetually failing. He remembers when love felt real, when words had weight and promises felt like unbreakable vows. He remembers when she looked at him as if he held the entire universe in his eyes. But over time, the meaning began to rot from the inside out. Laughter became polite, scripted small talk. Passion became a scheduled event, devoid of spontaneity. Warmth became a duty, an obligation to be fulfilled. He tried to fix it. Every man does. He told himself it was just a rough patch, that the tide would turn, that she would see the man he still was underneath the wariness. But the truth is, once meaning decays, it rarely resurrects, because meaning doesn't vanish in a thunderclap. It fades with each small compromise. When he starts pretending he isn't wounded by her indifference, when she stops asking, "What's wrong?" because she's afraid of the answer. When both parties become comfortably numb in their emotional absence. That is how love dies, not with a bang, but with a whimper, through 1,000 tiny acts of neglect, a slow starvation of the soul. And when a man realizes that love no longer means what it once did, he begins to detach, not just from her, but from the very concept of love itself. He starts to view affection as a transaction, something to be calculated, earned, and rationed. He becomes logical about something that was once the most spiritual experience of his life. And when love becomes a cold equation, it ceases to be like. He no longer dreams of building a future together. He focuses on surviving the present, on managing the remnants. The man who once found profound meaning in connection now finds a perverse safety in isolation, because at least solitude doesn't promise him one thing and deliver another. That is the collapse of meaning, not because love ceased to exist, but because it ceased to be worth the immense pain it inevitably seemed to bring. When men stop trusting in love, they don't vanish in a puff of smoke. They drift away, slowly, inexorably, silently, until one day they are simply gone. Not from the world, but from everything that once made them feel vibrantly, painfully alive. This is the emotional exile. It doesn't look like agony from the outside. It looks like peace. He still goes to work. He still meets friends for drinks. He still chuckles at a joke. But it's all a performance now, a well-rehearsed play held together by muscle memory and social obligation. Because deep down, he is not present. He is existing, not living. He is surviving the cacophony of life by retreating from it completely. He used to crave closeness, the messy, beautiful entanglement of two souls. Now, he avoids it. He used to desire to be understood, to be known to his core. Now, he hides his true feelings, building layers of misdirection so no one can misunderstand him again. He tells himself that solitude is power, that calm is superior to passion, that love is a luxury he can no longer afford. But the truth is, he isn't powerful. He is profoundly tired. He isn't at peace. He is numb. And in the dead of night, when the world is asleep, he wonders when this so-called peace began to feel so much like loneliness. He has grown comfortable in his exile. Here, there is no rejection, no disappointment, no risk of further injury, just stillness, a silence that, while empty, feels infinitely safer than the turbulent waters of connection. He fills his hours with distractions, work, the gym, endless scrolling through screens, not because they bring him joy, but because they are anesthetic against the gnawing thought of what is missing. He avoids any reminder of love like it's a contagion. Songs that once stirred his soul now make him quickly change the station. Movies about romance elicit a cynical roll of the eyes, not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much, and it's a pain he can no longer process. He tells people he's fine. He says he prefers his own company, and a part of him has even come to believe this narrative. But deep beneath the placid surface, there is a truth he cannot admit. He doesn't despise love. He just doesn't trust it anymore. So, he constructs immense walls, fortified with past hurts and future fears, and he is silently terrified that no one will even try to climb them. And behind those walls, he waits, not for a knight in shining armor, not for a grand romantic gesture, but for the part of his own spirit that still remembers what it felt like to be truly seen and not just looked at. That is the emotional exile, the safest prison a man will ever build, and the most difficult one from which to escape. Even when she is long gone, her ghost remains, Not her, not the actual woman with flaws and dreams, but the idea of her, the memory of what she represented. Every man who has surrendered his heart carries this feminine ghost. It's a quiet, persistent presence that lingers in the periphery of his life long after the relationship has ended. She is in the playlist he can't bring himself to delete. She is in the faint, lingering scent on an old sweatshirt at the back of his closet. She is in the way certain words or phrases can still bring him to a sudden, jarring halt. He doesn't speak of her anymore. He tells acquaintances he's over it, that he's moved on. But in his private moments, she is there not as a person to be longed for, but as a feeling. A benchmark for a warmth he once allowed himself to feel and then lost. And once that capacity for softness and vulnerability goes dormant, a part of him stays cold forever. He can date other women. He can share laughs and even moments of temporary affection, but it never feels the same. The connection feels mechanical, the emotions muted, because every new person stands in the long, imposing shadow of the ghost she left behind. She doesn't haunt him out of malice. She haunts him because a part of him still, stubbornly, believes in what she once made him feel. And that is the cruelest irony of all. He gave up on love because the pain was too acute. Yet love is the one memory his heart refuses to relinquish. He dreams about her sometimes. Not the passionate dreams of a lover, but in fragments and echoes. The sound of her laugh in a place she's never been. The feeling of her hand in his in a moment of solitude. He doesn't want her back, not really. He wants the version of himself that existed when she loved him. The man who still believed in forever, in soulmates, in the transformative power of connection. But that man is gone, buried under layers of protective logic and scar tissue. All that remains is the echo, the feminine ghost, a permanent reminder of what love once felt like before he learned, in the most visceral way, that it could utterly destroy him. There arrives a point where a man stops hurting, but this is not a victory. He stops hurting because there is nothing left inside to feel. These are the numb years. A long stretch of time where he doesn't cry, doesn't hope, doesn't even get properly angry anymore. He simply exists. Each day is a carbon copy of the last. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. There are no soaring highs, and for that he is grateful, because there are no crushing lows either. It is a flatline existence. He no longer craves the chaos of passion. He doesn't chase the high of affection. He doesn't even allow himself to fantasize about genuine connection. He once thought this numbness was a form of strength, a mastery over his emotions. Now he knows it is merely an absence of vast, silent space where his heart used to beat with passion and purpose. He can spend entire weekends in silence and call it peace, but in his most honest moments, he knows it is just distance. A profound distance from everyone around him, and, most tragically, a distance from himself. Friends and family see his discipline, his focus, his unwavering calm, and they think he is thriving. They don't see the emptiness that underpins it all. The mechanical routine that keeps his body moving but has long since ceased to nourish his soul. He used to feel a jolt of aliveness at the simple touch of a hand on his arm. Now, he barely registers physical contact. He used to write messages that poured from the heart, rich with emotion and detail. Now, his replies are short, efficient, and emotionally void. He doesn't feel the joys of life anymore, but he is perversely thankful that he no longer feels the depths of despair. That is what safety has come to mean after one too many fractures. He has become a master of the performance of being okay. He jokes, he works, he smiles on cue. But every night, when the distractions fade and he is left alone with the hum of the refrigerator, he feels a faint, distant ache. It isn't sharp pain anymore. It's the memory of pain. The ghost of who he was before he taught himself the art of not caring. The numb years don't arrive with fanfare. They creep in, silent and patient, until the ability to feel becomes a foreign language he once spoke fluently but can no longer recall. And perhaps the most devastating part is that he no longer even wants to feel again. Because to feel means to risk pain, and to risk pain is to remember love. And that is a cycle he is determined to break, even if it means living a half-life. So he remains numb, a man with a steady pulse, a functional mind, and a spirit that has forgotten how to beat for anything more than mere survival. The modern man is wounded, but he has been conditioned from boyhood to conceal the bleeding. From the first time he fell and was told big boys don't cry, to the adolescence where he was instructed to man up, to the adulthood where he is expected to be an unshakable pillar of strength, he learned early and thoroughly that his feelings are a liability. That softness is synonymous with shame. That love is something you give generously but are never allowed to need openly. He grew up believing that strength is silence, that real men endure pain quietly, without complaint, that vulnerability is a crack in the armor that the world will eagerly exploit. So he built a shell, and every disappointment, every heartbreak, every instance of rejection added another layer to this fortress. Eventually, it became so thick that nothing could hurt him. But the tragic consequence is that nothing can reach him either. That is the modern masculine wound. It is not that men feel too little. It is that they have been systematically punished for feeling anything at all. He watches how the world reacts to emotion in men. If he expresses anger, he is labeled toxic. If he shows sadness, he is seen as broken. If he is distant, he is called cold. If he opens up and is vulnerable, he is deemed weak. No matter what he does, it seems he is told he is the problem. So, he stops trying to explain himself. He stops asking for help. He stops showing the world what is real and raw inside him. And the wound, denied air and light, festers in the dark. You can see this wound in the man who works himself into the ground. 80 hours a week, just to feel a fleeting sense of being useful. You see it in the man who lies in bed next to his wife, close enough to touch, but feeling a galaxy of distance between them. You see it in the man who can no longer shed a tear at his father's funeral. Not because he doesn't care, but because he has forgotten how to access the grief. He laughs when he should be grieving. He nods in agreement when he wants to scream in dissent. He says, "I'm fine," because that is the mantra beaten into him by a society that has no space for his emotional reality. But inside, the truth remains unchanged and aching. He is tired of being everyone's rock, when no one has ever offered to be his. He doesn't want to be invincible. He just wants to be understood, to be seen, to be allowed to be human. Yet the world does not seem to grant men that basic grace. So they retreat, deeper into silence, further from emotion, until strength becomes indistinguishable from loneliness, and masculinity itself becomes a wound that never heals, but only bleeds quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface of their composed exteriors. He thought loneliness was a beast he could outrun, that if he built a successful enough career, accumulated enough distractions, or simply stopped caring altogether, he could finally leave it in the dust. But loneliness is not a pursuer. It is a companion. It is patient. It hides in the background while you build your empire, and then it returns, not as a storm, but as a fog, when the noise of your achievements fades. At first, he doesn't even recognize it. It whispers to him during long, solitary drives home after work. It echoes in the empty glow of his phone screen when there are no notifications. It settles in the silence that follows a conversation that touched nothing of substance. He told himself he didn't need love, that he was more efficient, more capable without it. That solitude was the ultimate freedom. And for a while, he believed his own propaganda. No heartbreak, no expectations, no roller coaster of emotions, just ... peace. But peace without connection is not peace at all. It is a kind of living death. It is not calm. It is emptiness. It is the sound of nothingness, and the chilling feeling that if he were to disappear, it might take days for anyone to truly notice. He has everything the world told him to want. A stable life, a solid routine, a smile that convinces everyone he's got it all figured out. But when he comes home to an empty apartment, the silence feels heavy, and he feels that quiet, persistent ache, the kind that doesn't stab, but throbs dully, reminding him that something essential, something human, is missing. He tries to outrun it. He fills his schedule. He keeps his conversations light and breezy. But in the late hours, when the world is still and there is nowhere left to run, it catches up to him the fundamental, biological truth he has been fleeing. We are not wired to do this alone. The world glorified independence as the pinnacle of strength, but they never mentioned the aftermath. They never warned him that achieving total self-sufficiency also means that no one feels the need to check if you're drowning. He doesn't even crave a sweeping romance anymore. He just craves warmth. A voice that feels like home. A silence that feels shared rather than solitary. But when you have constructed your entire identity around the principle of needing no one, how do you suddenly open the door? How do you admit that the fortress you built has become your prison? The deepest loneliness is felt in a crowd of your own making. That is the central paradox of the masculine void. The longer he lives in this state of self-imposed peace, the more he realizes it is just loneliness wearing a clever disguise, and it always returns. Softer, deeper, not as a sharp pain, but as a gentle, relentless reminder that even the greatest strength feels hollow, meaningless if there is no one to witness it, no one to share it with. And then, at the end of it all, there comes a moment when the silence becomes so loud it is deafening, when the numbness, his faithful shield for so long, suddenly cracks, when a man who has spent years, perhaps decades, mastering the art of not feeling, is finally forced to acknowledge that he is, and always has been, human. He doesn't break down in a dramatic, cinematic collapse. He doesn't weep uncontrollably or make desperate phone calls. He simply feels it. That small, aching, undeniable truth he has been running from for what feels like a lifetime. He never stopped wanting to be loved. This is the reckoning of the heart. After all, the bitterness has burned away. After the armor of pride has rusted and fallen off, what remains is something simple, pure, and terrifying. A quiet, almost childlike desire to be seen again, to be known, to be cherished. He thought giving up on love would make him stronger, that building a life of solitude would set him free. But solitude has its own kind of hunger, a hunger that strips away all the non-essentials until he is left naked with the core of who he is. And in that starkness, he can finally hear the voice he buried long ago, the boy he used to be, who still believes in connection, who still hopes that someone will look at him, all of him, and choose to stay. He realizes something then, something he never allowed himself to know before. He didn't lose his capacity to love. He buried it alive in a shallow grave, afraid of what it might attract. He mistook self-protection for healing. He confused isolation for peace. He equated strength with silence. And now he stands amidst the ruins of the defenses he so carefully constructed, the walls, the distance, the pride, and he sees with devastating clarity that they didn't keep him safe. They only made him invisible. They only made him lonely, and so he does the most courageous, most terrifying thing a man in his position can do. He lets his guard down. Not for a woman, not for a friend, but for himself. He allows himself to feel again, to remember what it was like to be soft, to admit in the quiet of his own heart that he still needs tenderness, that he still needs to be held, that he still needs love. He acknowledges that love was never his weakness. It was his oxygen. It was the very thing that made him feel alive. And perhaps his redemption lies not in desperately searching for someone new to complete him, but in the patient, gentle work of rediscovering the man he was before the pain, before the walls, before the great, encompassing silence. Because the truth is, men don't stop loving. They just grow quiet. They learn to hide their hearts in shadowy places. They wait for the world to give them permission to feel again. But love doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't follow a schedule. It only waits for one thing: courage. The courage to be vulnerable again. The courage to risk the pain for the chance of something real. The courage to listen to the quiet, persistent beating of his own heart. And when he finally finds that courage, when he finally decides that being seen and being heard is better than being numb and being safe, that is when the void begins to fill, not with a dramatic fanfare, but with a whisper of peace, a whisper of hope, a whisper of returning life. If this journey into the silent fractures of the heart resonates with you, if you see yourself or someone you care about in this story, please support Winds of Thought by liking this video. It helps us continue to create content that explores the depths of the human experience.